Thank you for coming all the way out on a windy day like today. There are people here from the North Fork and Shelter Island, and I just want to say thank you for making the effort to cross Napeag in our direction. You guys, there's more chairs over here, so you don't have to stand in the hallway if you don't want to. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Well, usually when your reputation precedes you, it's not a good sign. Denise and I know each other from Shelter Island. I was working as the director of the Shelter Island Historical Society for a couple years. And Denise and I spent a lot of time talking about sense of place and, you know, how important it is for people to tell their stories, our parents' stories, our family stories, because where we come from is who we are and where we're going. And I couldn't very well be preaching that without doing a dose of my own medicine. So when Denise asked me to come here and do this, I said yes. So I hope my story has some kind of meaning, beyond sharks, because I've spent my entire life trying to be separate from my father, but it's impossible. There's not a day that goes by where somebody doesn't send me a message on Facebook, or it's always the same thing. I could be on the other side of the planet and people would come up to me, if they see something on my passport and say, "Are you related to that shark guy?" And so it is Mundus the Younger, and I can't really do too much about that, but I'll try to make sense of the whole thing for you. This first slide I put up here because there's probably some people, I'm not sure if they're in this room, but if they are, they know who they are. Those are half of my classmates from 8th grade. I think it was probably about 1969 or 1970, I would guess. Virginia Garrison, Wendy Peterson, Robin Quisenberry, Marcia Edelstein, Monica Souls, Marianne Hartman, Sally Nielsen. I think the other gal on the end is named Veronica, but I don't really remember. If there's anybody in this room who knows those other people, let me know. So anyway, my story wouldn't be complete if I didn't start off with my parents. This is my father and my mother, Janet, probably, I would guess, around 1946 or had to be 1946 because my older sister, Barbara, was born in 1947, and that's her friend, Jerry. This is my father, probably around 1946 or 47, around that time. Everybody always asked me about the shape of his nose. Well, that's where he got his nickname from. They called him Jiminy Cricket when he was a kid because he had that giant hooked nose. And of course, that's where the name of the boat came from. So they had a boat and they were already fishing in Brielle, New Jersey, well before they came to Montauk. That's my mom, Janet, and I'm pretty sure that's the original Cricket, the first one. I know there are people in this room who might know some of this information better than me, and if I say something that's not right, help the rest of the room get it straight. So anyway, they moved to Montauk in 1951, and the story was, there were a couple different stories about why they left Brielle and why they came to Montauk, but the story that they always told was they were recruited, because I guess that Montauk had way too many customers coming out on that train, which they called the Fisherman's Special. I'm pretty sure for like $2 or $3 you could get a round trip ticket from Penn Station to Montauk and ice for your igloo on the way home. You could bring your rod and reels, and you could get off the train because the fishing boats weren't in Montauk like they are now. They were over in Fort Pond Bay at Fish Shangri-La. So you could jump off the train and run to the fishing boats. More customers than boats. They needed more boats to come to Montauk, and they told my father that, you could walk across the fish in Montauk, so they came. And that was pretty, pretty, all the pictures that I've seen of Fish Shangri-La pretty much look exactly like that. And of course, in those days, there were a lot more fish than there were fishermen, so there were a lot more giant tuna on the docks. If you can trace the track of the man by the kind of hat that he wears, they say the hat makes the man. It didn't take my father very long to start wearing that Australian bush hat. And this picture was probably taken right about the time that I was born, which is 1957. And when they first moved to Montauk, they lived on the boat. I guess there weren't that many places to live in Montauk, so in 1951, my sister would have been 4 years old, and they'd get off the boat in the morning. My mom would push a baby carriage around, hang out, at Pier 1 or wherever. I don't even know where they were, but she'd spend all day fooling around. And then when they washed the boat off at the end of the day, my mom would move back on the boat, cook dinner, and sleep on the boat, and the next day get off again. And I think a lot of families did that. And I'm pretty sure, maybe what year do you think my parents moved into that house? 1955 or so? 56? If there's anybody here who knows that, because I didn't show up till 1957. Anyway, they did have a proper house. And that's my older sister, Barbara. My father, who never really left the front porch without that hat on. And me, my mom, and that dog. We always had a black lab, pretty much. That's me probably at, 1 year old, 2 years old. It's a good portrait of the nose, by the way. And that's me probably 1959. Again, the dog always went wherever the boat was, the dog was. And everybody always asked me, well, when did you first learn how to go out on boats? And to tell you the truth, the answer is really, I don't know. Because as you can see, the second I could be on board and toddle around, I was on board. And that's 1959, so I was only 2 years old in that picture. But when you look at these pictures and you think about shark fishing and dead whales on the beach, you have to understand that it was a very, very different time. It was not against the law to catch whales. It was not against the law to eat sea turtles. It was not against the law to harpoon white sharks. And my father learned pretty early on that white sharks loved whale meat. And it didn't take him very long to start harpooning these whales and dragging them in, and they wound up on the beach right by the jetty. My friends that, ask about some of these pictures, they say, oh yeah, every day we went down to the jetty to see if there's anything cool going on. And there was. It's my thing. My mother worked at Gosman's, and I'd have to go to work with her in the afternoon. I think she probably went to work at 4 o'clock or so. And the deal was I have to play around under the restaurant and around the docks within eyesight until the boat came in the inlet. And when the boat went past the Gosman's, officially he became the babysitter. So she went to continued work, and there was always some kind of shenanigans going on. This is my sister Barbara and me, and I'm pretty sure, at first I thought that was Tuma's dock, because you can see Salivar's in the background, but I guess that's where the Viking dock is today. And if anybody knows for sure, I'd love to know, because obviously I was just a little person in that picture. This is my mom and my older sister Barbara. And my father, when he started this shark thing, it was sort of he learned by accident that people would pay good money to catch sharks. So instead of doing what everybody else was doing, inshore fishing for stripers and bluefish, he learned this chumming for shark thing was big business. And he used every possible thing to promote shark fishing, including his wife and his children, which you'll see. But at the same time, it's very interesting. You know, I spent the last week going through cardboard boxes full of all these old pictures. And, you know, what struck me, looking back over things that happened 55 years ago, was he had these two parallel lives. He had this sort of conventional American middle-class family life. That's Easter. You can see that I'm not very happy about it, but there is, you know, I mean, that picture could be anywhere in America, but yet he also had this weird shark thing going on at the same time. But we all grew up and we never thought anything was odd about it, really. I guess I was just brainwashed at a very early age. That was when the boat was at Gosman's, which was kind of between what's now the dock, which was Fitzgerald's Bar, and Gosman's, where the fish packing house is. So, again, people ask me, well, how did you start hanging around, spending so much time on the water? Well, there it is, literally on the water, you know. I mean, I was a sidekick wherever my father went, you know, I pretty much went with him. This is a really great picture that a good friend just passed to me a couple days ago. It's hard to see in this light, but there's a black lab there on the ground. That's what I'm doing. I'm laying there cuddling this black dog that just disappeared into the grass. And that's Danny Gorell. We lived, the house that I grew up in was on the old Montauk Highway where the Atlantic Bluffs are right now. I don't know if it's kind of a mess of condos in that whole stretch now, but anyway, it was an interesting place. It was called the Wyandanny, and it was a collection of little small houses and a couple of guest houses that Mary Smith and her father Knowles rented out to fishermen, mostly surfcasters. And then the small houses were rented out to other fishermen. Sonny Smith lived next door. I think his name was Schultz. Captain Schultz lived across the grass. Next door was Bob Sylvester from the Daily News. It was a really kind of an interesting and eclectic bunch, and we never, I lived in that house my whole life. I left Montauk in 1974. When I left, we were still paying $60 a month rent. 60, 60. So that really tells you how much Montauk has changed. And we had the ocean right there. We had the ocean, the old highway, the horses, which was Kate and Gaucho, and our house. So there you can see it. We also had raccoons. This, by the way, this is a picture taken before my legs grew. Just kidding. My father had this thing about raccoons. Whenever somebody found a raccoon, a family, you know, he would always bring a female raccoon home. And I can't remember never having a raccoon in the house. The raccoons usually would, you know, when they were small, they could live in the house, but when they got a little bit older, they became hormonal, and when they had the urge to start mating, we'd either leave the back door open or the cellar door open, so they could come and go as they wanted to. There's Katie in the background, who I think lived to be 38, is that right? 42 years old. So you talk about a happy mare that she would live for 42 years. And it was really a pretty cool place to grow up. You know, the ocean was right there. I don't think I really went too far, to tell you the truth. I wasn't, you know, hanging out at Ditch Plains with the other kids and thinking about what bathing suit I was wearing. I mean, I was fooling around at home, and we had our own path down to the beach, and it was a pretty great way to grow up. That's my sister Tammy, who's here somewhere. She's right there. So Tammy's 5 years younger, and we spent, you know, a lot of time on the boat. But meanwhile, my father had that other parallel thing going on of his whole promotion, you know, catching sharks. And I don't, you know, I don't know, the whole story of Jaws has changed the whole dialogue because, in my opinion, my father was really just like an alpha-type male going out hunting for alpha-type critters. He didn't really think too much beyond that, except how to market this idea to sell more charters to pay for his kids. He did not have any, revenge for evil. He was never on the Indianapolis. He didn't have any of that whole, cinematic motivations. He just, this is how he supported his family. And he pretty much attacked everything the same way in his life because when he was a child, he had osteomyelitis, which I think is a infection of the lining of the bones, the marrow maybe. I'm not sure what it is, but he nearly died. And he spent almost half of his childhood in bed, and he didn't graduate from 8th grade until he was 17 or 18 years old. And I don't think he did any high school. So when he bounced back to life, he lived it with gusto. And there were two things that motivated him. If anybody told him you can't do it, he would try. And the other thing that motivated him was, pardon my language, I ain't kissing anybody's ass. So those two things, you put them together, were a powerful force. Can everybody hear what I'm saying, or should I speak louder? Okay. So, this is the sort of public person that everybody, equates with my father because he was a man's man, and he was a man's man at a time where the world was changing all around him. And a lot of people paid him a lot of money to go out and do manly stuff. This fish, I think, was the one that's hanging in Salvars right now. I hope it's still hanging in Salvars. Good, that's good. It was harpooned. And again, you have to keep all these things without placing any kind of value judgment on it. In those days, people harpooned things. And the fish was, I don't think it was ever weighed because they didn't have a scale big enough to weigh it, but I know that Alex Joyce dragged it up onto the beach where you saw that whale by the jetty with a dump truck, and it was really hard to even get it out of the water onto the beach. They said 4,500 pounds. It was probably 1964, I would guess. And this is my favorite picture of my father because that is who he was. He's been gone 10 years now, but he still seems alive. Every day people talk about him or I think about him. And that picture, is his pant legs are rolled up, he's filthy dirty, he's like really jazzed, he's seen some fin somewhere. It really shows him in his real natural element without the gold shark teeth TV stuff, I had to actually buy this picture from the Daily News because that's the story of my life. Everything now is copyrighted. And there's a couple of things I want to get sorted out here in terms of facts. Everybody, there's a lot of misconceptions about my father, that he was illiterate and this and that. He wasn't. He could read and write just fine. He and my mother split up right around the time of Jaws because his story is the same story of any other flash-in-the-pan celebrity. Every news camera from ABC and NBC and CBS showed up in the front yard, and of course he was a giant celebrity on David Letterman's show, and then he was forgotten about. So he and my mother parted ways right about that time. The woman who lives in Hawaii is not my mother. I don't care what you read in the newspaper or what you read online. That is my father's second wife. My mother, Janet, passed away in 2014. And his wife in Hawaii has pretty much copyrighted everything. So, these pictures that you're seeing now are just the ones that we have from our family collection. So this is Tammy. And again, you see my father was not shy about using his wife, his children. I mean, anything he could use, he used us. And we didn't really think too much about it, to tell you the truth. I think he did this because part of him, he always said, I mean, Steve Lennox is here, he could probably tell you better than me, but my father always said that women made the best anglers because they knew how to deal with pain, they knew how to measure themselves, and they knew how to go slow and listen and take instructions. And no angler ever lands a fish without help, coaching, all of that stuff, because it's really hard. So he used me to show that if a little 10-year-old kid can do it, anybody can do it. And there's the end result. I think it's a little hard to read that, but it's 256 pounds on 40-pound test. And that's my sister Tammy, again, you know, mugging for the camera. And she didn't think anything about it. She's standing in a giant pile of blood, and she's got her fingers in the eye sockets of a blue shark. And, you know, this is like our normal family life. So they used to go to the sportsman show at New York Coliseum, and again, you see my sister and my mother, they're all dolled up, they're telling shark stories too, and selling charters. But my mom, God love her, she put up with a lot of nonsense. She was an unbelievable mother. She was a lot of the brains behind the marketing, the bookkeeping, the selling charters. She did everything. She sanded and painted the bottom. She put on fiberglass. She went to pick up chum. She ground chum. She fixed the washing machine. She took care of the kids while my father was out on the boat. So, you know, these women of Montauk, I've always thought, I'm in no position to write any book right now, but I've often thought that there ought to be a book written about the women. You know, we hear all the time about the great fishermen and blah, 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 and, you know, there are a lot of heroes out there, but the real heroes are the women who stayed behind and made sure all this happened, okay? Because it always takes two people to go to sea. One to be out there and one to be here taking care of business at home. And man, my mother was incredible. So this is probably around 1974. And I mean, I was very aware that Montauk was a great place to grow up as a kid. But by the time I got to be about 14, 15, 16, I think running around like a wild Indian was really not in my best interest. And I knew right away that if I stayed around Montauk with all the drinking and all the drugs and all the desperados, I was going to be on that path myself. And also, my father really, you know, I was in his favor when I was a kid because I don't think I was too threatening as a child. But by the time I got to be a young woman, he really wanted a son. There was no two ways about it. And I remember, I don't remember how I even got this into my mind, but I wanted to learn how to sail. I hated charter boats. I hated the cigar smoking and the swilling and the cursing. I didn't like sport fishing. And all those things, as my values started to gel, we started drifting further and further apart. So I told my father that I wanted to learn how to sail. And he nearly kicked me out of the house. He said sailing was for seagoing tourists and that it was the stupidest thing he ever heard in his life. So I left. I graduated high school in 3 years. I graduated in the class of 74 and bought a plane ticket to the Caribbean. So that's where I learned how to sail, working on charter boats. And I fell in love with the idea that you could do thousands of miles without burning a gallon of fuel. I loved the seamanship. I loved everything about it. I loved being offshore. I loved standing watch. I loved the self-reliance. But I guess I was too young. I was only 17 when I left, and I would sail charter in the wintertime, sail north, work at Gosman's in the summer to make enough money to subsidize, because I didn't get paid anything. I think I was getting paid $30 or $40 a week to work on a charter boat. And I did that for a couple years back and forth. And I loved the Caribbean. I loved the whole lifestyle, and I knew that, you know, sailing was for me. But something was lacking, and I met a guy in a bar in Bermuda, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm working on a boat. I'm on a sailboat." He goes, "Oh, how do you like that?" So I started saying, "Oh, it's really great, blah, blah, blah." But the thing is, every time something difficult happens, they stick me in the wheel and they teach another guy how to get better or how to handle it. And I was too young and too naive to even realize that I was talking about mentoring and glass ceilings, all of that stuff. He said to me, this was 1976, he said, "You know, they now let women into maritime academies. So if you wanted to go to school for 4 years, learn everything that you need to know about seamanship, no one will ever stick you on the wheel, and you'll get a 4-year degree. Now they let women in." And I'm like, wow, ships? Who works on ships? It never occurred to me. So I wound up at a maritime academy without even really knowing what I was getting into. I went to Fort Schuyler, which is New York Maritime Academy. I started in 1977. The first year that they started graduating women, and I mean a woman or 2 women, was 1976. So I was in the 3rd class that graduated women. They did not want us there. My class had 12. The year before me had 6 or 8, and the year before that had 4. This was not well thought out, okay? The whole institutional idea of all right, well, we have to start letting women do this. Well, they didn't think how. They didn't think how were we going to integrate. They didn't think how we were going to be housed. How were we going? There were no facilities for us. With no gym classes. We had to play sports with the guys. We didn't even have a locker room. We had to change out of our uniforms into our gym clothes in the powder room and the auditorium. And it was pretty incredible. They didn't even have uniforms for us. We had to wear men's uniforms and figure out how to make them fit, and it was horrible. So, despite all the smiling faces in these photographs, they did not want us there, and they made it perfectly clear that we didn't fit in, that we were, some of the things that, they were really sincere. They thought we were all just there looking for husbands, pretty much. And that we were stealing jobs away from real breadwinners. It was pretty old-fashioned stuff, and that was 1977. And we had a training ship. That was a training ship. And I think we had 550 people on a 600-foot ship. Out of that 550, there were probably 20 or 25 women, I would guess. And, we were all learning together. The girls were learning how to act, and the guys were learning how to accept us, and it was rocky going there for a while. This was my first ship. I was a cadet in 1978. It was a little gasoline tanker, and I didn't know. I went to the school, sent me there for sea time. So I showed up wearing my outfit, my shiny shoes, and my, khakis, and I was so naive. I went to the captain's room with my little letter of recommendation. I was so proud of myself. I put it on he wouldn't even talk to me. He wouldn't even make eye contact with me. The first thing he said to me was, I don't like blacks and I don't like goddamn women. That's exactly the words he used. He said, I'm not going to have anything to do with you, and he called the chief mate. So I spent the whole time avoiding the captain. I was on that ship for 3 weeks. When I left, I had big bruises on my arms because he'd reach out, and he'd get so mad, he'd reach out and shake me like this. So anyway, that was my first ship, 1978. And then I graduated in 1981. And again, there's a lot of junk on the internet and, newspapers, they quote these things. I just want to make it clear. There were 12 girls in my class. I guess we had 250 total in the class. There were 12 women in that class. I was the only one that went to sea. Before I even got my license in the mail, I had a job. I started working for Exxon. That year they hired 65 mates and engineers, and I was the only woman out of the whole group. So it was pretty rough going. Again, the odds were just, we all felt the same thing. We all felt like if there were more women involved, it would be more normalized. If it was more normalized, there wouldn't be so much churning, and there just weren't that many women out there that were educated as officers. And people are always asking me, well, what did your father think about your career? And, God, you went through a military academy, you had this great license. What did he, well, that posture there tells you, what does he think about it? Like, it was a big joke. So, 1981, I had some reservations about working on oil tankers, and most of that came from Montauk because my friends, all said, well, God, you're such a traitor, how can you go and work for an oil company? In those days, again, oil tankers were pretty ugly business. They were still dumping dirty ballast. They were still pumping black oil when they had, cleaning tanks. It was really dirty business. And in the beginning, I really did some soul searching about that. I had this romantic idea that I was going to, work on banana ships, and go up the rivers in South America. Well, wrong. Those kind of jobs were horrible, and they didn't pay any money. And Exxon, of course, being a big corporation, they had a third of the stake in the Alaska pipeline, so there was a lot of oil coming down from Alaska and a lot of good jobs. So I took it. And in the beginning, almost all the other officers were World War II veterans, old guys. And whenever we complained, the people of my generation were like, we can't pump that oil over the side. And they all said, there's 10 ships right underneath us right now that are torpedoed full of oil. How can you even... It was really a rough thing because it was people of our generation, the 70s and the early 80s that got on those ships. Now, because of people like us in that time period, putting up a fuss and being on deck and being in charge and signing the logbook every day, now when the rain falls on the deck, it doesn't even go over the side. Rainwater is collected and put in separate tanks. The oil is separated out. So we've come a long way since those early years. In the early years, we didn't even have inert gas. Nowadays, none of the vapors from the cargo escapes into the atmosphere. They would flood the displaced empty part of the tank with stacked gas. But when I first started working, they were open tanks. And if you were loading gasoline, for example, so much vapors would come out of the tanks. You looked in the tank, you counted rungs on the ladder, like you timed it with your watch. Okay, one rung takes, a minute and a half. You couldn't keep a hat on your head. The vapors would blow a hat right off the top of your head. People would run from the tank to the side of the ship and throw up because it was pretty horrible. So again, environmentally, we've come an awful long way. These are the kind of ships that I was on my whole career. I sailed on oil tankers and spent 17 years. I never sailed as captain on ships. I do have a captain's license. I have a 3,000-ton license for offshore. I have an unlimited chief mate's license, but I never sailed as master on a ship. Right about the time I started sailing on ships, I met my husband. And this is Earl Voorhees. He became my guy who stayed at home. And I'll tell you what, without support of somebody like Earl, I don't think I could have done it. He was a women's advocate, for one thing. He understood that the struggles that I would come home and talk about every day were valid, and he gave me the strength and the fortitude and the courage to keep fighting that war. He and I were together for 32 years. And that's pretty much what every day at sea coming down from Alaska is like in the wintertime. It normally would take about 4 days on a good day, on a good weather run, to go from Valdez to San Francisco. But in November and December and January, when you get these huge fronts coming all the way across the Pacific, you get a big long fetch, and it might take 8, 9, 10 days to do the same trip. You just go slow, and you keep the ship pointed as best you can almost into the seas, and you just go gently through the night. And, you know, the ships were big, but not giant in the beginning. They all had anywhere from 25 to 19 people on board. So there wasn't a lot of humanity to start off with. And I found that the best secret for myself, being an officer and being a woman, was to just stay to myself. Because the less real social interaction there was, the more successful I was. While I was going to sea, my husband and I decided that we wanted to live in East Hampton. But what we wanted to do didn't exist. We wanted a small barn so that we could put our boat inside with a little loft apartment and then go away in the wintertime when it was cold. We couldn't find a piece of property, or we couldn't find a barn, so we decided, in our classic can-do fashion, that we would go and we would do this ourselves. So we went upstate New York and found these 5 old antique barns, all hand-hewn. We brought them to East Hampton, cleared the land ourselves, and put up these barns. A real old-fashioned kind of thing. And we did it all together ourselves. We had a couple friends that helped. My family helped a little bit, and he was a restoration carpenter, so with his wood skills and my rigging skills, we put the whole thing together with block and tackles and gym poles and old-fashioned stuff. That was on Northwest Creek in East Hampton. So, you know, like they say, if you can't find what you want, you do it yourself. Well, we did. Meanwhile, I still had to go to sea because now we had a mortgage. So you see how you get sucked in. 17 years at sea, there has to be an explanation. Why would you spend such a long time at sea? Most guys don't spend more than 5 or 6 years at sea. Women don't last very long at all. I think right now there's still about the same percentage today as there were 40 years ago, maybe about 5% women out there. That's the Panama Canal. That's the Suez Canal. And one thing I have to say about growing up in Montauk really equipped me pretty well for going to sea. You know, I knew about weird. You grow up in Montauk, you go out into the real world and they like weird. No, I know weird. And you know, I could handle myself. I knew I had to be around drunks, so I knew how to deal with seamen. I knew my way around.
Like the rainbow.
Yeah. That's Alaska. Going to Alaska in the wintertime is not fun at all. We would have to, in order to get the lines out of the side of the ship to tie up, we'd have to use baseball bats to like bust off the ice to even get them out. But what I discovered about going to sea on ships was that I liked the idea. I'm kind of like an all or nothing at all person, so I had, for every day I spent on the ship, I had a day of paid vacation. So I would do that for 60 days or 90 days, and then I would come home and I could do whatever I wanted for the other 60 or 90 days. And Earl and I spent a lot of time. We had a lot of really great boats. You know, you can take the Montauk out of, you can take the girl out of Montauk, but you can't take the Montauk out of the girl. And it's just like, we had all different kinds of boats. And this is one of my favorite boats. She's a 1951 Verity. We restored it also. I was able to go racing in Europe, in classic boats in Europe. I just like all kinds of boats, big ones, small ones, fancy ones, plain ones, fishing boats, power boats, little boat, anything. That's Holland. Exploring the canals in England, that's a Thames River barge, only 6 feet wide, no, 7 foot wide and 60 feet long. It's like driving a railroad car, you know. It's fun. Indonesia. Bali, that's a fishing boat. Went fishing with those guys. Antique, this boat, 1930, sailing canoe. Bahamas. But that's a boat, believe it or not. See that bundle of packages there? I really questioned my relationship with my husband when he told me, oh, I want to buy this boat. And we got in the car and we drove to Queens. And I'm like, no. And we got to Queens, and you know, all of those houses, the little brick ones with the little aluminum jalousie, you know what, they all look exactly alike. We found the one we were supposed to go to, and the guy says, oh yeah, the boat's in the basement. I'm like, oh my God. And sure enough, Earl saved this. It was a surprise. It was a 1914 design folding kayak. And in 1914, you know, the whole idea of going out into nature and the cleansing powers of the wilderness, you had a folding boat that you could put on a train, take it upriver, put the boat together, and go downstream. The Navy then picked up on it. These boats were dropped all over by helicopter and speed forward to the middle 80s. Earl and I discovered that we could hire a private plane to drop us into an island somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, put the boat together, and cruise through the Bahamas. So of all the boats that I've ever cruised on, fancy ones, big ones, small ones, expensive ones, there's an old saying that the amount of fun that you get out of a boat is inversely proportional to its size. And that's so true. This boat was only 17 feet long. So that's the whole thing, the boat, the skin, the sailing rig, and our limited weird, you know, camping outfit. There it is, tiny, tiny little boat. So we did that a couple of times. We put in the middle of nowhere, sailed every day, and when we found a place that we thought was a good place to land, we'd put the boat on the beach maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which gave us time to find dinner. Because we could only carry, I don't know, 10 gallons of water and just enough ingredients to cook with. Some onions, some rice, a bottle of rum, not much. We did that twice. So this was my last ship. As you can see, the small boats are a big antidote for, you know, these big ships are industrial platforms. They're full of computers, they're very hard, very unforgiving. This one was, I was on this class of ship for 3 years. She was 987 feet long. It drew 64 feet loaded. and had a beam of 166 feet. So they were pretty big. And we loaded mostly in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Egypt. And then either go through the Suez Canal, partly loaded, or if we were fully laden, we'd go around the Cape of Good Hope to the English Channel, or those deep water parts in Europe like Le Havre, Southampton, Rotterdam. In Italy, we went to Genoa and Trieste, Marseille, big places. And the ships are so big that if you forget your gloves on the bow, it's a quarter of a mile away. So we rode bicycles everywhere. That helped speed things up. So I have to back up again. My last ship was 1997. And the reason that my career ended is that I started having stage 2 Lyme disease symptoms. I didn't really know what it was in the beginning. I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown. I couldn't do math. I couldn't tell like what the red and the green meant at a traffic light, stop, go. I couldn't remember people's names. I couldn't introduce names in a row, people I'd grown up with my whole life. I couldn't do long strings. I'd forget words. So anyway, I did what everybody did. I struggled with it, and I, did doxycycline 3 weeks here, 3 weeks there, nothing, not even close. And I had a really good doctor who recommended there's only one thing to do. He gave me a referral to a neurologist. I had spinal fluid drawn, and when they analyzed it, it was like full. So it wasn't just in my bloodstream and in my joints, it was in fact in my brain. And I wound up with a surgically implanted PICC line, Hickman catheter, and did IV Rocephin and Cipro for 10 months. And it took about 7 months for me to be able to really do the antibiotics on a daily basis without stopping, because the kill rate was horrible. It was really painful, and that ended my career. So I retired in 1997. I was only 40. And this is what retirement looks like. Another project. Again, we wanted a big cruising boat, and what we wanted and the kind of boat that we wanted, we couldn't find it on the market in anything that we can afford. So we bought this boat for not very much money and restored it. And I mean restored. 4,000 new screws on the bottom, some planking was replaced, all new through-hole fittings, new tanks, new wiring, new plumbing, new rig, new everything. And she turned out to be a really cool boat. But it had been a long time. I mean, all that stuff, I studied electricity and I studied all those things in school, but that, had been, a long time ago. And it was a good exercise for me too, a refresher, because I did all the mechanical and the electrical stuff and Earl did all the woodworking. So that's what she looks like today. She's a very cool boat. And she was custom designed for the Bahamas, so that's what Earl and I did. We spent a lot of time in the Bahamas with her. She's 57. She's 50 on deck, 57 with the bowsprit, and it's a motor sailor. It's got a Ford Lehman in it, 6-cylinder diesel, 120 horsepower with a 28-inch propeller. And that really makes her more successful than anything in the Bahamas, because in the Bahamas it's quite skinny and you're jogging through reefs and whatnot, so you stop, you're able to stop, thrust, boop, 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 pick your way along. So she's a brilliant boat. 4 feet. Long straight keel, 44-foot waterline, so she's really fast when she's sailing off the wind, but super maneuverable.
Tell us her name.
Surprise. And we decided that this is where I get to shill for my business. East End Charters is what I do for a living. We decided that we needed to start putting some of these assets to work. We sold our house in East Hampton in 2007 because we wanted to have more free time and less time taking care of a big project. So we moved to Greenport. And we got to Greenport and we realized it's all this great waterfront and all these beautiful places, but most people can't get there. So we started this company called East End Charters. And I figured if I was going to have a website and sit by the telephone and talk to people on the phone, I might as well charter more than one boat besides just my own. So that's what we did. We have a fleet of boats. And we do fancy parties, super fancy parties.
Weddings.
We do weddings. Isn't that funny? This I didn't make this up. This is called trash the dress. It's a wedding term where you spend a lot of money on a beautiful white dress and you destroy it as part of the wedding ceremony. I don't get it, but there it is, trashed. So, I mean, I never dreamed in a million years that I would ever be part of the wedding industry. I mean, I lived with Earl for 27 years before we even got married ourselves, all right? But there's a lot of money on the North Fork in weddings. There are 150 or more vineyards now, and weddings are a big deal. So we do a lot of bachelorette parties. We do parties for friends who just want to get together, class reunions, employee appreciations. We have power boats and sailboats. This is a classic Huckins 1954 boat. She's really great. And sometimes people call and they want to go play golf on Fisher's Island, for example. Now, a guy who's going to play golf on Fisher's Island, he doesn't want to take the ferry. He wants to go by private yacht. So we do that. We do everything that the fabulous chic Hamptons wants to do. We have parties for that. We do photo shoots, a lot of fashion work, and fireworks. I mean, anything you can dream up, we pretty much can fix you up on a great boat. And my boat lives right behind the house in Greenport, which is another cool part about living on the North Fork. It's not as fabulous as it is over here. Food's really great. Farms are really great. Boats are really great. I love living on the North Fork. But then something terrible happened. In 2015, my husband passed away. After 32 years, I mean, we were inseparable. We did every single thing together. And losing him was a really tough time in my life because I felt like he was a partner in everything. That was 5 years ago. So then I realized, well, God, I mean, what am I going to do now? And I decided that I needed to start giving back. I needed to integrate myself. I needed to express my love and connection with the rest of humanity in another way besides my husband. So I joined the Fresh Air Fund. This is Juanita, who comes to visit. Every year she comes. She's been, this will be her 4th time. She's 16 now. And I really realized that the way to heal yourself is through other people, and young women in particular. So I started mentoring young gals. It's sort of, I mean, nobody just has an idea like, oh, I'm going to do this now. You just start doing it and you find you love it and you're good at it. And this is Leah, who came to me as a super talented young sailor, but she didn't have a license and she didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. And I said, look, girlfriend, I have an idea for you. And she got her license and she started running boats. Just look at that look on her face. She's incredible. So now she's the captain of a very sophisticated, very expensive 70-foot yacht, and she's well on her way. And these 2 gals, I spent the summer with. Their interns from the Harbor School in New York. It's a charter school that trains young people as mariners. They learn all kinds of skills. They learn mechanical skills, seamanship skills, maritime legal skills, oceanography, weather, and they came to work for us in the summertime. And they're great. They're really fun. Both of them have graduated. Now they're also working on tall ships, both of them, Jessie and Elise. Jessie's done a lot of sea miles with me also. Recently we just went to Cuba together. There she is. So it's really great to work with these young women and understand that I wanted to give them what I found was lacking in my life. And I know 40 years have passed, and hopefully this has now become an institutional part of our learning, but a lot of these young women, they don't even really know what they're good at. They don't know that they can do this. They have, you know, so it's really great to take somebody like that and sort of like take all this desire and then bring it into a focus. And it's really very satisfying. This is my goddaughter, Luna. Her middle name is Pearl, which is Pat and Earl put together, Pearl. So she spent all winter, not this winter, but the winter before, we spent 7 months together on the boat. And you know, like I said, these gals have no idea what they're made of. They have no idea they have any aptitude in particular. But boy, you put them on a job and give them the right tools and the right encouragement, and they can do anything. Now, she is my goddaughter, and I have to say I'm not really like very good at going to church or anything, but I do take my godmother job pretty seriously. And I feel like we get enough religion offshore out in the middle of the ocean. That part she's good at. But what I want to make sure that all these kids understand is that you can always catch your own dinner. You know, you can plot your course from point A to point B. You can check the oil and make sure this engine runs properly. It will carry us thousands of miles if you just put your mind to it. And pretty much that's what they come away learning. And it fills me with joy. So I kind of feel like that's my new purpose in life, is to give back. This is Liz. She's been Surprise's captain now for 3 years. So she does the charters in the summertime, because I don't mind doing the charter contracts and talking to the customers, but I don't really want to go sailing every day doing the charters. So she does that, and she's great. She's in Indonesia right now, learning how to surf. So, you know, one of the things about doing a talk like this, as you can imagine, it's really difficult to put together a slideshow and tell your whole life story in 40 minutes. So I spent all last week looking at old photographs, and then I started thinking, well, come and go, come and go, come and go. I did a lot of coming and going. And then last year I came home, and this is what met me coming home. I'm like, holy shit. So there's hardly one single photograph in this whole thing that does not have water in it. And I guess that is the story of my life, is that, you know, my father, God bless him, gave me the tools that I needed. Try hard, don't be afraid, you know, do what you're good at, and just forget what everybody else has to say about you. Just apply yourself. And he was absolutely right. That's the way he lived his life, and that's what he passed on to his kids. And I couldn't resist putting this picture in here because it's a parody, of course, with a little photo behind my ear, but I mean, flower. But I just feel like at 60 now, I want to try to start taking it a little bit more easy and maybe a few less sea miles. And the important thing is our connection. And like I said before, it is about sense of place. And you can't be from a place like Montauk that has more water than land and not acknowledge that water is a big part of our makeup. And that's all I have to say, really. Thank you.
We have a little bit of time, so if you would like to take some questions from the audience.
I'd be happy. I'd be thrilled if anybody has any questions.
Questions here?
Pat, when Denise sponsored you at the Shelter Island Library, you gave a wonderful story about how you would greet your father at the jetty. Could you retell that story to the people?
Well, I first of all, I have to remember exactly which story I told, but I mean, it was pretty much the same. Well, the old jetties, I guess most people here probably remember what the old jetties looked like. They were not geometrically stacked. They were long piles of rocks, and they had holes underneath them. You could climb under the boulders from one side to the other, and that's where I hung out, seeing enemies with sticks and whatnot. And when I heard my father coming in the inlet, even under the rocks, I could tell what the sound of his engine was like. I'd pop out and run down the jetties to keep up with the boat, wave to my mother on the way by, and meet him on the dock. That was the game, is to run back and be at the boat slip as he was backing in. Is that the story you're talking
I
about?
think you remember you crawling under Gosman's restaurant and through that and everything.
Yeah, it was always a labyrinth to find the shortest way to get there. Yeah.
If you could tell the story, this is a great story of you and your dad going into Salabar.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was an accomplice to a lot of pranks, and there were a lot of pranks. Some of them can't even be mentioned, but this one, he had a little tiny mako head, probably not much bigger than that, pointy little nose, and he put it in those days, we didn't have backpacks, we had like those little plastic cheesy bowling bags. Remember what I'm talking about? So the mako head was inside the bowling bag. And we sat at the bar, and I had, I don't know, Shirley Temple or whatever kids, in those days, even kids could sit at the bar. And he had some kind of highball, and we waited until the ladies' room was empty, and so I took the bowling bag and I took it to the ladies' room, lifted up the lid, put the mako head in there. And it was icky. I mean, it was bleeding a lot, right? So I put it in, cleaned the toilet seat, cleaned up all the blood, put the seat back down, and went back and sat at the bar. Yeah. And somebody did come in, and we just sat there. And as soon as we heard that scream, we just got up, just like casually walking on. So, like I said, as soon as I started getting old enough to be like a normal human being, like an adult, that was the end of it, because I wasn't an accomplice to a sidekick anymore,
Great story.
I know the cricket was going to be restored, and I don't know what happened to that and where she is now.
She is. She was restored at Box Marine in Morehead City. Joe DeBella, do you remember him? He was a friend of the family, and I guess the whole DeBello family used to fish with my father, and he bought the boat, and he restored it. He uses it, it sails out of Morehead City, and he uses it to take veterans fishing. And I'm not sure, I don't really think they catch sharks. I think they might be a tag and release thing, but he has one of those special wheelchair cranes, and turns out the cricket was perfect for that because that giant cockpit. So yeah, it's called the Cricket 2 Project. Cricket number 2 Project. I think you can look it up online. But she's 70 now and still going strong. I don't know how that's possible because she has, galvanized fasteners, but apparently it's still going strong. Yep.
With all the miles that you've logged at sea, and particularly seeing the slide coming back from Alaska, can you tell me a story from when you were just really, really scared? Was there any incident that just you'd like to forget about?
There are quite a few. Yeah. It's really funny because last night I spent about an hour talking on the telephone to a captain that I sailed with many, many years ago, and he was having heart failure. So we were talking about these things, about how many times that we were just like, oh my God, I hope this ship holds together, because those seas in Alaska are nothing to fool around with. But I happened to be on it. The scariest thing that happened, it was in the summer, and we were on our way from Valdez to San Francisco. The ship was fully loaded with crude oil. I was sleeping when it happened. I woke up and it sounded like we were going to be in a collision. When you put a big ship in reverse, everything starts going, and that's what it sounded like. It sounded like we were in reverse. I'm like, and I got up. As soon as I put my feet on the deck, I couldn't stand up. The whole ship was bouncing up and down like this. It was super violent. And I looked out, I pulled the curtain back, I looked out, it was perfectly beautiful blue skies, seas, no wind, no nothing, nobody around. And I put on a pair of shoes and I started, I couldn't even go down the passageways. I had to hold on like this. And nobody knew what it was. The ship was violently shaking. All the overhead panels came down. Pipes were breaking, steam was, it was like a voyage to the bottom of the sea. And I went and checked the gyros on 2 decks down, and then it was really hard to get back up the ladders. I got to the bridge, and as soon as I opened the door to the wheelhouse, I couldn't see anything. It was just complete solid, opaque, orange smoke. I mean, it was like a I didn't even know what it was. And I brailled my way through. I got into the wheelhouse. As I was walking through this orange smoke, brailing my way out to the bridge wing, I heard on the radio, somebody said, stand clear. We have excessive vibration. We have a fire in the engine room. It was another ship. And as soon as I got out to the bridge wing, the old man and the chief mate were both looking over the stern. They thought a blade had fallen off the propeller. It was an earthquake. Because as soon as we heard that other ship say that on the radio, it was like an epiphany. We all just went, earthquake. It was crazy. And it lasted for about 4 minutes, I guess. And we shut down completely. As a matter of fact, as I was passing the gyro room, I ran into the chief mate, the chief engineer, who we had this sort of side door to the engine room with like a skinny little ladder. And his hands were, this is a steel ship with steel ladders with pipe railings. And he's going like this. He's trying, there's no way he was going to make it down that ladder. And he's trying to hold on like this. And I'm just like, oh my God. I just kept on running. And it was, turns out, we shut the ship down, we inspected everything, because we wanted to make sure we weren't leaking oil or cracked. And the forepeak, which is the steel bulkhead about 3/4 of an inch thick, had separated like this, right in the middle, boop, 14 feet long, crack in the middle of the steel. So that shows you how violent it was. And we brought the ship to San Francisco. We pumped all the cargo off. We cleaned the ship. The inspectors came down. All these experts came down. Nobody knew what this was. And they looked at it, and all the brackets between the deck and the shell plating were all bent in the same direction. Hundreds of them. Boop, boop, boop. So they were able to figure out that we were 30 miles from a 6.7 earthquake. So that was probably the scariest thing that ever happened. Yeah.
I see a question back.
You have a favorite quote?
Oh, thank you so much. The whole time that I was at school, they impressed upon every one of these kids to be humble, okay? And in a big sign right in the mess hall, it said, "The sea is selective, slow in its recognition of effort and aptitude, but fast in sinking the unfit." That's the quote, right? Yeah. That's the reason they sent guys to sea on sailing ships, to teach them humility. Now, the difference is, kids need an app to tell you what direction the wind's coming from, So that saying might have been lost.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.